This is Gavin Newsom. This. Does he not know that he's basically like a tin pot dictator? Hey there, friends, fans, and foes of Dad Saves America. John Popola here, and I thought we'd take this Friday to get a lesson in media and media literacy by our favorite governor, Gavin Newsom, because, well, let's just hear right from him, shall we?
We need to change the conversation, and that's why I'm launching a new podcast, and this is going to be anything but the ordinary politician podcast.
That's why I'm doing the thing with the podcasts, doing the new media. Gee, I wonder why you want to change the conversation, Gavin. Could it be because your state is falling apart, or your biggest city has burned to the ground under your nose and homelessness continues to be at all-time highs while people leave the state at record levels? But you know what? Let's change the conversation. I don't think I can get through this. I've already seen this and I don't think I can get through it.
I'm going to be talking to people directly that I disagree with, as well as people I look up to. But more important than anything else, I'll be talking directly with you, the listener.
Is Gavin Newsom's voice also getting gravelier? He's becoming almost impossible to understand. I'm going to be talking so much that my voice will not function. I will be unable to be audible on my podcast.
Real conversations. What's going on with the cost of eggs? What are the impacts, real impacts to you around tariffs? What power does an executive order really have? And what's really going on inside of Doge? Look, there's an onslaught of information that we take in.
Media literacy moment. He is reading a script. Let's just look real carefully at his eyes.
Look, there's an onslaught of information that we take in.
You see that little that we take in?
Look, there's an onslaught of information that we take in.
Couldn't be off the cuff. This podcast is going to go great. Actually, in fairness, being a talker is the only thing he's good at. So in some ways, this is the natural evolution of his governance, an exercise in nothing but talking. If he could just hand over the reins to someone else and focus entirely, exclusively on this podcast, I think most Californians would be better off.
So let's take it to the sources without the typical political mumbo jumbo.
There might be an inverse correlation between media training and authenticity or self-awareness. I think like the more media trained you get, the less aware of how ridiculous you look. I should actually keep this in mind because I'm ridiculous enough as it is. So this is a warning shot for all of us doing podcasting and YouTube that beware, you could end up Gavin Newsom.
In the first few weeks, we're going to be sitting down with some of the biggest leaders and architects in the MAGA movement. This is Gavin Newsom.
This is Gavin Newsom. Not that before. No, not that other stuff I did in the past. No, this. I can't help it. My old Spike TV promos days click in anytime I hear this kind of like old school TV call to action. This is Gavin Newsom. This. The body language. So, okay, what's going on here? It's obviously fun to mock him if you don't like him, like I don't. And I think like many of you don't. How should we think about what this is? Well, there's a couple ways to think about it. One is it's a kind of admission that the game fundamentally in the world of public sort of media and discourse has truly changed because Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, home to both Silicon Valley and Hollywood, feels that he's not getting his voice heard in the media. That is interesting in and of itself. And I think something quite positive, because what it means is the monopoly, the monoculture of the media industrial complex, these sort of news media, the entertainment industry, and the newspapers and the broader sort of news and entertainment landscape has truly, truly changed. There is now a recognition that the old monopolies that were in control of the narrative have come crashing down. And so people like Gavin Newsom, who thought they could rely on celebrities and glowing biased coverage by all the major outlets, now realize that the major outlets aren't so major anymore. I think this is great. I think it's weird, but it's great. And you know what? It's actually not all that weird, because if you think about what this is, podcasting fundamentally is the newest form of radio, one of the most famous examples of political radio goes back to FDR.
My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking.
See, FDR's fireside chats were a way for the president at the time in the 1930s to address the public directly during a time of crisis, during the Great Depression. This was the dawn of the radio era. This new technology made it possible for the president to speak directly to the public. Long before Donald Trump was taking to Twitter, FDR was broadcasting his voice to all of us. And at that time, bandwidth was incredibly expensive. This was one of the things that was fundamentally different about where we are now compared to where we've been. What made the fireside chats so potent and so powerful was precisely because they were actually quite new and rare. It wasn't like anyone could do a nationwide broadcast and have people tune in and listen. This was special. And that is one of the things that's so profoundly different about the time we are in now. I can reach as many people as Gavin Newsom, and I'm a nobody. You are watching me because of the profound changes in technology that have made this possible. A friend of mine and former guest on the show, Martin Gurry, has written a book about this fundamental transformation that's taken place called The Revolt of the Public. And the way Martin talks about it is that we are in the midst of a fifth wave of information. You could think of the first as essentially the dawn of written language, sort of hieroglyphics, and the next one being the alphabet. The third wave was a big one. This was the printing press, which made it possible for the Bible to get printed en masse, which then gave rise to the 30 Years' War in Europe and the Protestant Reformation. These technological changes that come about, as we are experiencing now, end up being profound. They end up shaping the whole of society, frankly, and we are in the middle of experiencing one of those. Martin calls it the fifth, the dawn of the internet. When I first got out of college and got my first job at MTV Animation, it was the late 90s, 1999, the start of, the modern internet era, the beginnings of internet video. And I think it's interesting to go in the Wayback Machine and look at the way the old guard media at the time was responding to this new technology. Frankly, it's kind of shocking and also not all that dissimilar from the kinds of things we experience these days as new technologies come online.
Millions of Americans own a personal computer. If you're one of them, you can now glimpse the future with nothing more than a modem, a phone line, and a few dollars a month.
Oh, that's
that little mark with the A and then the ring around it?
At?
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard it.
Around.
I'd never heard it said. I'd always seen the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it.
Well, it's very hip to be on the internet right now.
It's very hip to be on the internet right now, says Bill Gates. This is right at the dawn of the internet browser wars. And you can kind of see, if this video is happening now, and this is maybe already starting to get old, you'd say these sound like a bunch of boomers talking about the @ sign and about getting on the internet. Katie Couric in this clip really, it really sounds like an old lady.
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
Not what the internet is. Can you explain what internet is? This was the beginning. And we are now roughly 25 years, let's say 30 at max, into this fifth wave, this transformation. I think it's an interesting moment to reflect on what it's doing for us and to us. I think we are prone these days with so much change to feel like everything coming at us is fundamentally bad. That the iPhone was a mistake, that social media is rotting our brains and destroying our kids and turning them into nervous wrecks. And that is mostly true. But I think it is important to consider that in many ways, we are living in the freest time when it comes to information we've ever been in. There is this nostalgia for the time before the fifth wave, the fourth wave, the wave of television, the wave of 3 broadcast networks, and Walter Cronkite.
Good evening from our CBS newsroom in New York on this, the first broadcast of network television's first daily half-hour news program.
During the time of Walter Cronkite's broadcasts, he came to be considered the most trusted man in news, maybe the most trusted man in America. And of course, he had this famous phrase that would end every broadcast, including his final one.
And that's the way it is. Friday, March 6th, 1981.
And that's the way it is. I think we, or certainly the old guard, yearn for this. Gavin Newsom wants you to believe that he knows the way it is, and that the only way he can get the way it is out is by broadcasting it to you directly. I think you should take anything he's saying with a serious grain of salt, and maybe he should get back to trying to, govern one of the biggest states and biggest economies in the world instead of running a podcast. But even so, I think we are all better for people like Gavin Newsom having podcasts directly. I think it's useful for us to be able to cut through these middlemen and hear lots of different points of view. And in some ways, that's sort of the easy take for our times. Look, we now, instead of having 3 networks and one nightly news guy saying, that's the way it is, after covering a handful of stories about the entire globe, we now have essentially access to an infinite amount of information. I think that's a step in the right direction. I think we're in better shape than we used to be. I think the track record of having a tiny, tiny little bit of bandwidth coming through, little drips of information coming through, wasn't truth. It wasn't getting objective facts. We were getting selective facts. For example, when JFK was interviewed by the press about the Bay of Pigs invasion, in which the US government sought to overthrow the regime in Cuba, JFK went in front of the press and said, well, we had nothing to do with this, but I take full responsibility nonetheless. Everyone in the room knew that that was a lie, that the US government was absolutely behind the attempt to invade, but they put it out there as such. That was how much control, centralized control, the prior wave of information made possible. We, the people, only got that one story and by and large accepted it. And so in the aftermath of this horrendous sort of international disaster, JFK's approval rating actually went up. Compare that to today, where every single move of the Trump administration is being broadcast functionally in real time on Twitter and across multiple news outlets. And I say we've got more transparency than we've ever had before. And I think that's largely good. And yet it is also weird that we have functionally even more avenues of straight up state propaganda, like Gavin Newsom's podcast, or that of other politicians like Ted Cruz or Dan Crenshaw, or, you name it. There's plenty of people out there doing podcasts who are currently members of the government trying to get their message out. The big change has been the great democratization of broadcasting itself. The ability for each of us and all of us to get our ideas out there into the public square. Even with the big tech censorship and selective transmission that we've all experienced over the past couple of years, I think we're still, even in the depths of that, we're capable of getting more information than we used to be able to get. It used to be the case that you wouldn't find out that, for example, the Vietnam War was essentially launched on false pretenses because of the Gulf of Tonkin until years later when someone would write about it in a book. No one would know except for maybe a handful of conspiracy theorists who were really actually conspiracy fact finders at the time. Now this is all happening in real time. The obvious next place to take this, if you want to have some kind of lesson, is that we now have to curate our own news feed. We have to seek out both sides if we want to understand what the truth is. There's services out there that let you do that, like Ground News, which is not a sponsor of the show, although I'd be happy if they were, but provide an ability to say, okay, let me see what like the right wing is doing versus the left. How is this issue being covered across different outlets? Who's funding them? That's all great. It's also exhausting. And I think this brings us to one of the challenges of living in the fifth wave. And that is that we are more fragmented than ever before, and we are more driven to distraction than ever before. And I think one of the things that's also broken, which I find interesting, is the relationship between politics and culture. Andrew Breitbart was famous for saying that politics is downstream from culture. And I think that has broadly been true. But we now live in an age where instead of DC being Hollywood for ugly people, which is a sort of beltway phrase that gets thrown around, it's now just Hollywood. So Barack Obama leaves office and becomes a movie producer, producing disaster movies about the destruction of the United States, which is super weird, but he does it nonetheless. Sitting governors become talk show hosts while still in office. The president, who I broadly like, Donald Trump, was the host of The Apprentice, a reality show and one of the top-rated shows in all of television history. We are in a kind of like permanent entertainment political complex at all times. Frankly, it's media overload. And you know what? To be perfectly honest, I struggle with this myself like every day. Andrew Huberman says, don't look at your phone when you first wake up, but I'm not always good at that. I will often find myself drinking my coffee too early and scrolling through Twitter and looking at the news feeds and seeing what the latest YouTube video is that I might want to watch before I take my dog for a walk. I can feel the onset of a kind of adult ADHD. I imagine many of you feel the same thing. We are truly bombarded. All of this choice has created a certain amount of chaos in our lives. The prospect of saying, well, now you can try to curate the truth and uncover it for yourself, and now we're all investigative journalists, while empowering, is also exhausting, and it's not crystal clear that most of us are even equipped to do that, even with the fire hose of information we have at our fingertips. And so I think the thing that is a skill that, frankly, our kids maybe can teach some of us is how to make use of this world we're in now to become experts in the thing we've always wanted to be expert at. You know, that's one of the things that I think is so exciting about the times we're in. If you want to dive deep on a subject, you can do it now, like never before. I think that takes a kind of discipline that is at the same time getting harder and harder to have. When I was commuting into New York City every day, during the financial crisis in 2006, 7, 8, 9, I found myself with a lot of time on my hands. And this is really before the iPhone was a thing where you could just sit and scroll on the internet. Podcasts were the first way I started to learn economics. And that has come to shape the way I understand the whole world. It's the reason why I'm here right now, because I made rap videos about economics and the financial crisis. And that changed my whole life. The lesson from that really was that if I could do it, anybody could. If I, as just a Penn State grad that worked in television, could teach myself enough economics to end up on a stage at the Economist magazine's Buttonwood gathering in New York City, talking in front of central bankers and stuff, then really anyone that wants to learn anything really can. As a parent, just think about for myself and for my 19-year-old son. This is an interesting and challenging moment to try to help him and for you to help your kids navigate. What are the tools we need to navigate this world? I don't think it's just being a news sleuth. I think, in fact, the primary tool we need to try to absorb the tsunami of information from the likes of Gavin Newsom and the rest, and Elon Musk, and all the rest of the people out there blasting us with their ideas, myself included, is to take some of that bandwidth we have and apply it to a sense of our own moral reasoning. Not knowing what's true and false so much as what's right and wrong, and whether or not the things that we hear resonate with our moral values, with our ethics. I think this has been something that has gotten very, very difficult. And I think in the partisan times we're in, ethics tend to go out the window. Ethical is whatever my side does that helps my side win. That's might makes right. I don't like that. I don't think that's a good moral ethic. I think we have to do better than that. So I find myself increasingly buying books like this, the Republic of Plato, which I thought I read, but in fact, I haven't read. It's like, oh yeah, no, I'm an educated guy. I read Plato. And in fact, I haven't actually read this book. You know what? I probably won't physically read this one. I buy it somewhat as an artifact. I'm going to listen to the audiobook. That is how I'm trying to keep my mind from going completely off the rails. I'm finishing up a book now called Dominion by Tom Holland. super awesome. Sort of a sweeping exploration of the history of the Christian world and its impact on the West. That is something all of us can do. I think that what this tsunami of information has actually delivered to all of us is the means to have a classical education at any age, even even pushing 50. Even if you've already done that in your distant past, the moment we're in right now, I think it calls for us to do that, to revisit the sort of basics of what it means to be a person. And I think this is the lesson our kids are turning towards us to teach them more than ever, because the tsunami of information is not helping them do it in and of itself. That takes curation. And I don't think news curation is good enough. I think moral discernment and moral curation is where we all need to head. Here's something that has worked for me. Take a moment each day to pick something that you want to make progress through. I love audiobooks. I think they're a great place to start. And that helps me know that I'm enriching something deeper than the daily news. I usually mix that in with a little bit of Father Mike's Bible in a Year podcast, which if you're into that sort of thing, it's pretty great. These are things that I am finding help ground me and calm the monkeys scratching around inside my head. But let me know what you're listening to that's helping you with your adult ADHD. Let me know what kind of tips and tricks you're using to manage your kids' media diets, and have a great weekend.